to Dalsan TV's Primetime News, your premier station for news and updates. I'm your presenter Abdurrahman Yusuf, and tonight, these are the stories that are making our headlines. Former Al-Shabaab deputy leader currently acting as a prime minister in Somalia. Somalia attends IGAD's virtual meeting on deteriorating security in Sudan. International community implores for peace and stability in contentious SSC region. Somalia's Minister of Finance in Washington for financial reforms meeting. Glad to have you back. Now let's delve into our bulletin with the departure of the Prime Minister Hamza Abdi Barre for Umrah and an obligatory but important pilgrimage for Muslims in the holy Masjid of Al-Haram in Mecca. The absence of the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Justice and the Somali Constitution confers the authority to the Minister of Religion Affairs Mukhtar Robo Al-Mansour. With the departure of Prime Minister Hamza Abdi Barre for Umrah, a non-obligatory but important pilgrimage of Muslims to the holy city of Masjid Al-Haram in Mecca, and the absence of Deputy Premier and the Minister of Justice, the Somali Constitution confers the authority to the Minister of Religion Affairs, Mukhtar Robo Al-Mansour. Mukhtar Robo is a former deputy leader and former spokesman of the Somali militant group Al-Shabaab. In 2015, he defected from Al-Shabaab due to ideology issues after years of hiding in his hometown. In 2022, Robo was appointed as the Minister of Religion Affairs in the Somali government. Robo's nomination signaled President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's willingness to negotiate with Al-Shabaab, after he asserted that more than a military approach will be required to end the insurgency. His appointment fueled a debate with some chiding it, while others lauded the move as a step towards reconciliation and a smart way to battle against the group. The United States had at one point offered $5 million bounty for Robo's capture, a bounty which was removed at the Somali government's request. He was arrested in late 2018, shortly before he was scheduled to run for president of Somalia's southwestern Bay region. The former Al-Shabaab militant had spent the last 4 years under house arrest after he fell out with the ex-president Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, known as Farmajo. Analysts believe his absorption to the government will help tremendously in the fight against Al-Shabaab. Already, he has started engaging clerics who play an important role in preaching against violent extremism in the Horn of Africa nation, which is struggling with instability. Robo calls his role the ideological front, encouraging religious leaders and scholars to speak out against Al-Shabaab in order to reclaim the Islamic narrative and confront their flawed ideology. This approach was demonstrated at the recent Islamic conference in Mogadishu, in which Robo argued that the government should police the teachings of religious scholars and introduce a licensing system for imams in schools. Somalia President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, alongside leaders from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, has called for immediate cessation of hostilities between the warring parties in Sudan. President Mohamud asked IGAD leaders to take a firm position in the crisis to restore peace in the country by asking leaders to dispatch IGAD delegates to intervene in the situation.
Somali President Dr. Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, alongside leaders from Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, has called for an immediate cessation of hostilities between the warring parties in Sudan. President Mohamud asked IGAD leaders to take a firm position on the crisis to restore peace in the country by asking the leaders to dispatch IGAD delegates to intervene in the situation. The president spoke on Sunday during a virtual meeting with IGAD heads of state on the deteriorating security in Sudan. Those in the emergency session were President Salva Kiir, South Sudan, Yoweri Museveni, Uganda, Ismail Umar Gele, Djibouti, and William Ruto. The leaders called on the Transitional Sovereign Council General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo to stop the war negotiation table. IGAD resolved to send President Kiir to President Ruto and President Gele at the earliest possible time to reconcile the conflicting groups. Sudan's relationship with Ethiopia in particular has been strained over disputed farmland along their border, the conflict and the Tigray region that drove tens of thousands of refugees into Sudan and Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The current uphill in Sudan exacerbates problems for the already bleeding East Africa region with protracted wars in Somalia, Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Despite a pledge to end hostilities in the disputed region, Somaliland has failed to withdraw its forces from Las Anod, angering international community. 16 Western nations declared in unison on Monday The conflicting parties must honor their commitments to put an end to the hostilities.
International community implores for peace and stability in continental's SSC region despite a pledge to put an end to hostilities in the disputed region. Somaliland has failed to withdraw its forces from Las Anod, angering the international community. 10 Western nations declared in unison on Monday that conflicting parties must honor their commitments to put an end to hostilities. The remarks follow several calls for an end to the fighting, which has now lasted for 10 weeks, from both Somaliland and SSC Khartoum faction. The main parties to the conflict have repeatedly and publicly committed a ceasefire and dialogue, but they have not yet implemented these commitments. The joint statement read in part, Somaliland, which broke away from Somalia 3 decades ago, has controlled the town since 2008, but the local clans support Somalia's federal government and wish to be governed by it. Despite local and international calls for a ceasefire, fighting has continued, raising fears of a full-blown humanitarian crisis amid a biting drought that has already affected thousands of people in the contested region.
The Minister of Finance, Dr. Elmi Mohamed Noor, is in Washington to discuss financial reforms. Central bankers, finance ministers, executive and the civil society leaders are meeting the International Monetary Fund and the World Banking spring meetings this week in the ambitious economic reform and fiscal agenda.
Somalia's Minister of Finance is in Washington for financial reforms meeting. The Minister of Finance, Dr. Elmi Mohamed Noor, is in Washington town for a meeting to discuss financial reforms. Central bankers, finance ministers, executives and civil society leaders are meeting at the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and World Bank spring meetings this week with an ambitious economic reform and fiscal agenda. The spring meetings of the IMF and the boards of governors of the World Bank Group, which ran for 3 days, aimed to discuss issues of global concern, including the economic outlook, poverty eradication, economic development, and aid effectiveness. During this time, featured are also seminars, regional briefings, press conferences, and many other events focused on global economy, international development, and other world's financial system. Mid-March this year, International Monetary Fund IMF team led by Laura Jaramillo conducted discussions with the Somali authorities in Nairobi and reached a staff-level agreement on the 5th review under Extended Credit Facility (ECF) arrangement. This agreement is subject to approval of the IMF Executive Board, despite significant challenges, including from the continued severe food crisis. Somalia has maintained strong reform momentum and program performance has been satisfactory. The CBS will continue to enhance the regulatory framework and strengthen its capacity in risk-based supervision, including through legislation and preparation of risk-based.
That's all we had prepared for you tonight from our desk here in Mogadishu. I would like to thank the Dalsan Media fraternity for making this news bulletin a success. Have yourself a lovely night.